A robot may not injure a human being. In 1942, science fiction author Isaac Asimov introduced his 3 laws of robotics with his short story Run Around. And according to Asimov, the first law of robotics is that, and I'm quoting, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. In the story Run Around and other well-known Asimov stories like I, Robot, Bicentennial Man, Isaac Asimov featured a technologically advanced world, one far superior to ours right now, and in this future world he envisioned, smart robots helped with daily tasks in the household. They were valued, a commodity even. There were even companions to the elderly, nannies for children, and of course there were also workers. In his stories, Asimov explained how these robots had what it called positronic brain, a type of CPU, a central processing unit for a brain that managed and processed their vision, their intelligence, and their motor functions. Now, sure, Asimov's law of robotics was based on fiction. He was, after all, a fiction writer. And we know that in real life, drones can be armed with missiles, or a machine gun can be placed on a robotic system, and these things are meant to be used in warfare, and they're meant to harm a human being. Therefore, it's not really possible or realistic to follow Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics to the letter, but he was prescient in predicting robots becoming integrated into society, because they are, and they're becoming more and more prevalent in our everyday lives. The obvious question right now, are we ready for this? Well, San Francisco thinks we are. After much debate, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors voted to pass a policy that would allow police officers to use ground-based robots to kill, and I'm quoting, when the risk of loss of life to members of the public or officers is imminent and officers cannot subdue the threat after using alternative force options or de-escalation tactics. That measure still needs to pass a second vote at a meeting next week, and then still needs to be approved by the mayor before becoming city law. But hey, it's California, it's San Francisco, and they're so nuts out there, anything is possible, am I right? Desperate measures, perhaps, by a city that has lost the plot under a weak leadership, under a state with lame leadership, when it all comes down to things about crime and lawlessness. So what do we make of all this? Is this any better or worse than the very frightening robot-like army we're seeing in China right now? Marching the streets in frightening dystopian fashion, producing these kind of images, folks. We only thought we'd see these types of images in movies. Allow me some background here, if I may. In Dallas in July of 2016, after hours of negotiations with a man who killed 5 police officers and wounded 7 others, the suspect was killed when a robot delivered and detonated explosives where the man was holed up. They said they had no choice.
We saw no other option but to use our bomb robot and place a device on its extension for it to detonate where the suspect was.
And, well, that move was unprecedented. The use of robots to deliberately deliver lethal force had not ever been used, and not surprisingly, it raised a lot of questions. Law enforcement experts searched for a precedent, but they found none. At the time, a robotics expert told the Associated Press that the suspect's death was the first time, to his knowledge, that police have used a robot to kill. And Willard Oliver, a professor of criminal justice and former police officer and retired military member, said soldiers in Iraq had used bomb robots against combatants, but that police officers never had. Well, 6 years later, San Francisco is a step closer to allowing police to arm human-controlled robots with explosives to kill or incapacitate people in extreme circumstances. And like I said, the debate in San Fran was apparently quite heated, with supporters saying that police can be trusted to use the robots appropriately and that it could potentially put an end to a large shooting or a mass casualty situation. Opponents, on the other hand, said approving the use of killer robots was too closely related and too scary to science fiction movies where robots become unruly and attack human beings, or that use of these robots was a threat to the poor and to the people of color. Of course they did. But here's my take on this. Anytime you use technology to avoid putting human life at risk, it's a slippery slope. It's not black or white. If police or government agencies weaponize these robots, if they authorize a robot to use deadly force, that can be problematic, because who determines this? Is this a program with an algorithm that determines who lives and who dies? Because we know how certain social media algorithms decide who posts and who doesn't. Who ultimately decides this, right? What is the threshold for use of deadly force? How can a robot determine that an immediate harm to a human exists? This, to me, is the slow creep into a police state. And no surprise, the birthplace is San Francisco. Ironic, coming from a city that was at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter and the Defund the Police movements. And now they want to outsource the most critical decision that law enforcement officials ever make, which is when to use deadly force and when not to. In a time when Joe Biden's economy is crushing the middle class and destroying America, the liberal bastion of San Francisco wants to outsource our jobs. San Francisco would rather employ a robot than to hire a professional from the community in which they are policing. Another example of the left's war on the working class. Did you know that just over half the San Francisco Police Department are non-white? So more than half are minorities. So is San Francisco actively now taking those jobs away from minorities and others instead of hiring people from the community? They're looking to hire robots to fill those roles. Slippery slope indeed. I want to know if Nancy Pelosi's district is going to require these robots to be made in America. And I don't know, maybe she'll ship them off to China.
China is one of the freest societies in the world.
Look, it's a slippery slope. Starting to use these types of robots, look no further than Nancy Pelosi's free society, China, because we now know China loves their drones and their robots, and they certainly love their police state. China uses drones and surveillance robots to monitor their citizens in their police state. Communist China, remember. This is what happens when these types of things are used to intimidate and to monitor the civilians, the population. Even though our failing leadership refuses to actually denounce any of China's demeaning and dehumanizing tactics, the disaster we're seeing unfold right now in China, the one that Joe Biden has nothing to say about, is all about control, an irrational need for total control.